Here's what we know right now about the developing story in Buffalo, where 5 people were shot today at a health clinic. One of the victims passed away at the hospital. 3 others are in critical condition, and a 4th has already been released.
Police say this man is the shooter, 67-year-old Gregory Ulrich. They say he opened fire inside the Allina Health Clinic in Buffalo. Investigators are also looking into a bomb threat at a Super 8 that is not far from the clinic.
We have live team coverage tonight, including new information about the suspect from his former roommate. But we're going to begin with Devon Roming, who's going to piece together what happened today. Devon?
Hey, Randy. Yeah, investigators are still here at the Allina Clinic behind me processing the scene for any evidence. And we're told from the time that the 911 call went out to the time that the suspect surrendered, this all happened within a 12-minute time frame. Buffalo police are calling it a targeted but isolated tragedy after 5 people were shot, one of them fatally, in this Allina Health Clinic in Buffalo shortly before 11 Tuesday morning.
Upon our arrival, we also located several victims in this. It's a horrible looking scene.
Those victims were all taken to hospitals in the Twin Cities, some of them airlifted. And as that was all happening, many neighboring businesses and schools were forced into lockdown.
A lot of us were freaking out. We just thought it was lockdown drill.
The Minneapolis bomb squad was also on scene after reports that homemade explosives were said to have gone off inside the clinic.
We also found a suspicious package in the corner of the lobby.
The situation also prompted a search in a room at the nearby Super 8, where witnesses tell police the suspect, 67-year-old Gregory Ulrich, had been staying.
We did send a team from my office over there to evacuate the Super 8 motel. We did find additional suspicious devices,
leading investigators to then execute a search warrant at this mobile home where a neighbor told us Ulrich had lived but moved out just a week ago.
We certainly don't want to leave any stone unturned, and we want to make sure that we're being prudent throughout this entire investigation.
Now, as the investigation into why this happened ramps up, state leaders are offering well wishes to the victims and their families and thanking law enforcement for acting fast.
From everything I'm hearing in this, in an incredibly fast manner that I think probably when the data comes out saved lives by their actions, and we're grateful for that.
Now, investigators say it could be days before their investigation here at the Allina Clinic wraps up. And as for Ulrich, well, he's expected to appear in a Wright County courtroom first thing Thursday morning.
And I heard this man say, "Get down on the ground." And I turned and I saw the back of this man and he had a gun. I didn't know what to do.
That is just one scary and heart-wrenching account from a woman who was inside the clinic during the shooting today. Danny Spiewak is live in Buffalo tonight, and he's been speaking to witnesses all day. Danny, I can't even imagine the stories these people have to tell tonight.
Well, Randy, unfortunately, there are a lot of them, as this shooting happened, of course, during regular business hours in a busy commercial district just near Highway 55 here in Buffalo. And of course, as people are trying to process exactly what happened here today, just before noon, there were 3 different prayer services, at least 3 with more scheduled. And we're also told, of course, as people are looking, they are trying to really just process what happened.
Lord, I need you.
At St. John's Lutheran Church, Pastor Ryan Clark comforted a community searching for answers.
Who are afraid, traumatized, and needing peace.
In Buffalo, these images from the Allina Health Clinic will be hard to shake.
There's one driving down there now.
From his backyard overlooking the clinic, John Klatt heard the first gunshots.
That's what it sounded like, an explosion.
And he saw staff and patients scatter.
As I pull into the clinic, 2 nurses come outside, and I figured something was wrong because they were running. And they come up to the vehicle and they said there's been a shooting, and I didn't know if anyone had called the police, so they got in and I ended up calling 911.
Tiffany Polite missed the commotion by minutes.
I was just ready to drop my mom off at the front door and I was going to go park. And then those 2 front windows were shot as I was in the parking lot, so she could have easily been in the way. Wrong time, wrong place.
Polite drove the nurses to safety, shots firing as they left the scene.
It was just like, I more so heard the glass breaking.
Only later would they learn the full extent of what had happened.
There is none like you.
Life had been lost in the small town of Buffalo.
We'll pray for those that are afraid or traumatized or saw some terrible things here today.
We do not yet know the identities of the victims involved in this shooting, but we'll share that information as soon as we get it. Back to you.
We heard the horrifying events play out through dispatch audio. At 10:54 this morning, the first multiple shots fired call came in.
Send as many ambulances as you can right now.
Buffalo Police and Wright County Sheriff's deputies were sent to Allina Health Clinic, where they found multiple victims.
At least 15 shots were fired. No further information at this time. Just somebody came and started shooting.
Send the first ambulance you can get into the parking lot. Be the back northwest corner. I got 4 or 5 with gunshots back here.
So I'm coming out with 2 survivors, not injured.
The Allina's been notified. They are looking into air care. Looking at least 5 injured critically.
They also found the suspect at the scene and took him into custody.
The male said that the gun and a briefcase is in an office by the front desk. He still should be sprawled out on his stomach.
Suspect is in custody in a squad.
Well, our Care 11 Investigates team found Gregory Ulrich has a history of harassment and threats of violence against a doctor at the Allina Clinic. And they also found documented warnings showing this was not a man who should be allowed to own firearms.
He had his issues with the hospital and the doctors there.
Raymond Zanstra is a former roommate of mass shooting suspect Gregory Ulrich. He says anyone who knew Ulrich knew he hated the health clinic in Buffalo because they would no longer prescribe him the pain medication he wanted.
There was a particular doctor that he did not like.
Court records back that up. They show Ulrich pled guilty in 2019 to violation of a harassment restraining order that mandated he have no contact with Andrew Bergdorf, a doctor at the clinic. He was not allowed to enter the Allina Clinic and Buffalo Hospital unless transported by medical personnel for emergency treatment. But in April of last year, the case was dismissed because Ulrich was found mentally incompetent to proceed.
He had all kinds of mental health issues.
By law, those documented mental health issues should have prevented Ulrich from legally possessing a firearm. But his former roommate claims law enforcement signed off on a permit.
Why would you do that? Why would you? I don't understand.
We found a document in Ulrich's court file where he'd applied for a permit and a court services agent warned that he should not be allowed to use or possess any dangerous weapon. Zanstra claims Ulrich bought a gun.
He bought a Smith & Wesson. It was brand new in a box.
So, AJ, we don't have it confirmed that it was signed off on. He was able to buy those firearms legally. But what happens if it's found out to be true?
Well, Julie, if true, this is going to be a huge part of the investigation. Did law enforcement, in fact, sign off on a permit allowing a man to get a gun after he'd had a court case dismissed because he was found to be mentally incompetent? If not, where did the gun he's accused of using come from? We're still digging for answers tonight. Julie?
All right. Thank you, AJ.
4 a.m., we received a 911 call from a clinic in the report was that shots had been fired. Officers responded. Those officers immediately were given information that the shooter that there were several people injured within the clinic. And I would just like to say I'm very proud of the men and women of law enforcement that responded to assist with this incident, to put themselves in harm's way. Everyone came together, and I just want to say thank you. And again, our heart breaks as a community. This is a day that no community would want to go through.
That was the Buffalo Chief of Police doing his best to describe the horror that happened in that community this morning about an hour before noon. 5 people were shot at the Allina Health Clinic. Several sources are telling us that one of the people shot has died. Lou Ragoose is one of several on our team in the community of Buffalo. He joins us live tonight. Lou?
Yeah, Jana, the clip that you played there, that was the beginning of the press conference with the Buffalo Police Chief clearly struggling to hold back tears and to fight the emotion just to explain the basics of what happened here. And that's kind of the feeling around this town. It is a small enough town here in Buffalo that a lot of people kind of have that it's not supposed to happen here type of feeling about the entire thing. It's small enough town that as the victims' names are spreading, amongst the community, it's kind of like a friend of a friend of a friend of at least just about everybody here. So everyone in this town feels like they have some sort of connection to what happened. And, that combined with the horror of the reality of what happened inside the clinic is kind of hitting home with a lot of people here today.
Absolutely. Lou, we heard so many things as things were going on late this morning. Obviously, the shooting, figuring out who the shooter was. But early on, we were hearing about possible bombs and explosions being left at different places. Do we know tonight if that was the case?
Yeah, that is one of the bizarre parts of this. For sure, they found what they thought was an explosive device, both here at the clinic and several more over at the Super 8 motel where this suspect apparently had been staying before. I guess what's in question right now is whether or not any of these explosives actually went off. It's kind of weird to not really know for sure whether they went off or not, but there's so many different agencies here investigating. Minneapolis police sent their bomb squad to go in and check things out, and they did share a lot of information, frankly, at that press conference, but at the same time, they were careful about not saying something that might end up being incorrect. And so that's where things stand on that. One thing to point out, Jana, this is a clinic here where they're doing a lot of COVID-19 vaccinations. And I think that was one of the fears that people had when they heard about what happened here, is that it might have been somebody that was targeting them for a reason like that, especially when you start talking about homemade bombs and stuff like that. And I think the more that we're learning about this suspect, who's not yet been formally charged, but he's been identified by the sheriff as 67-year-old Gregory Ulrich, it's sounding more and more from what they're telling us and about his history, and that we're learning that he had problems with the clinic personally, and he had problems with doctors here, and there had been past incidents that are going to continue to come out in the days to come.
One more quick question before we let you go and move on to talk more about that suspect. Do you know when police got there to the scene? Did that suspect put up a fight? Did anything else happen, or did he surrender to police?
It sounded like he surrendered. In fact, the dispatch audio that we're able to hear, that doesn't always end up to be true, but what they were saying over the dispatch was that he was laying sprawled out on the floor, almost like he had walked in and did what he did and then surrendered and waited for police to come. So those are the kind of details that'll definitely come out in the criminal complaint in the next day or two here. But there was no sort of hostage situation or shootout. It just sounds like the shooting happened here. Something may have happened with an explosive device, and then he gave himself up to the police.
All right. Thanks so much, Lou. So now we move on to who is that suspect, 67-year-old Gregory Paul Ulrich. Let's bring in our I-Team reporter, AJ Legault. AJ, you've been looking into him all day. What have you been able to find out?
Well, Jana, what we've learned so far is that the suspect in this mass shooting, Gregory Ulrich, has a history of harassment and threats of violence against a doctor at that Allina Clinic, and there was also documented warnings that this was not a man who should be allowed to own firearms. Mr. Ulrich pled guilty in 2019 to the violation of a harassment restraining order that mandated that he have no contact with Andrew Bergdorf. That's a doctor who works at that Allina Clinic in Buffalo. He was not allowed to enter the Allina Clinic or the Buffalo Hospital unless he was transported by medical personnel for emergency treatment. That's what the court records show. And in the file that we've been digging through, we found a court services agent who was doing a pre-trial or pre-sentencing investigation learned that Mr. Ulrich had applied for a permit to purchase a firearm. And the agent wrote, and I'm reading it off the document here, it says, "It is highly recommended that the defendant not be allowed to have, use, or possess any dangerous weapons or firearms as a condition of his probation." And we don't know if that permit to purchase was granted or not. That's not part of the court file, but clearly Mr. Ulrich is alleged to have had firearms in his possession. And in April of last year, April of 2020, that case for the violating the harassment restraining order was dismissed because Mr. Ulrich was found to be mentally incompetent.
And when that happens, when a case like that is dismissed, one thing I've been reading is that often the part about firearms stays true, though, that the person should be kept away from firearms or even be asked to turn those in to law enforcement. Is that right, AJ?
Yeah, Jenna, actually, Minnesota law says that a person is ineligible to possess firearms for a number of different reasons. And one of those reasons actually is if you have ever been found incompetent to stand trial or found not guilty by reason of mental illness. And clearly, Mr. Ulrich was found to not be competent to go forward in this with his prior charges for reasons of mental illness. So unless he somehow had his ability to possess a firearm or ammunition restored, which there is a process for that, unless that had happened, he was not allowed to possess firearms.
All right, AJ, I know you and your team are working hard on this to get us the latest and more that you uncover tonight at 10. So we'll be looking forward to that report. We appreciate you being on BTN tonight. We will be right back.